Welcome to Drifting Deeper, a podcast about consciousness, culture, and human potential. I'm Nick, coming to you from California, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is Francis Runzel, a hypnotist from Chicago. Francis specializes in integrative hypnosis, and we discuss parts therapy when used in hypnosis, shadow work, what it's like to start out in the hypnosis world, a little bit of origin stories, and the phenomenal work that we do in the hypnosis frame. Unfortunately, in the tradition of last-minute glitches, circumstances forced me to use a slightly defective microphone on this interview, so you're going to hear some distortion on my end of the conversation, but Francis's part of the conversation comes through nice and clear. I've cleaned it up as best I can, but that's where things are at the moment. You'll also probably hear a little bit of traffic in the background as there's a bit of construction going on down the road from me. I promise this will not become a pattern. Thank you for hanging in there, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Francis, you are a hypnotist in Chicago? Is that how you operate?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this wild and wacky art that is hypnosis.
That's a really good question. Basically, I've always been interested in mind over matter. And years down the line, I ran into speed reading and NLP around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe like only 6 years ago, I found NLP. And then when I was exploring that, I got to the point when it introduced hypnosis, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hypnosis. Like, everything else made sense up until that point, but I was like, hypnosis? I don't know. And so, so I was having this kind of like conflict, like everything else made sense, but hypnosis. So I started kind of getting curious, and everything did make sense in NLP, and like they were teaching you how to do it and like what it is and all of that. And I was like, okay, this is very different than what I thought. I was thinking it was mind control or like the movies, that kind of stuff. In fact, at that point, I thought I was like so smart that I was immune to hypnosis, like that I would have such strong willpower, kind of like Star Wars, like these are not the droids you're looking for, kind of stuff. So, interestingly enough, I found, Melissa Teer's book, Integrative Hypnosis,
mm-hmm.
and that just blew me away. That really cleared up all my misconceptions and kind of showed me what it really is about. Because at that point, I really didn't know. I thought it was more about that mind control, but when she showed me like the applications of it and how you can help people, and that's really where I feel the power lies, is helping people transform any facet of their lives. I was just kind of hooked.
Yeah, it's hard not to be at a certain point, really, because unlike a lot of people who started with formal training, I actually started when I was 18, and I had been reading about it since I was 14, but being a goofy teenager, had never really set aside the time to master it. So a bunch of friends and I were sitting around at a party one day. We were not in a legal state of mind for our age at that point in time, if you get my drift.
Okay.
And like an idiot, I said, hey, has anyone ever tried hypnosis? And I tried the Elman induction, like on everybody there, and failed catastrophically on every single attempt. But I had seen so many things that had gone through. I didn't, of course, I had just read a book. I didn't realize you shouldn't use the Elman induction on any entertainment hypnosis, all this other stuff.
Sure.
So I tried again when we were all in a better state of mind a day or two later, and just had amazing results because they were all teenage actors and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I was hooked at that point. I mean, hypnosis just had its claws in me and was not going to let go at all.
Definitely.
Yeah, and there's just something about the magic of being able to, in the entertainment sense at least, rewrite someone's experience, at least for a temporary time. And then, of course, therapeutically, to help somebody take care of something that's ruining their life is astounding.
Definitely. And that's a really good point. I guess the further that I have moved with it, the more I realize, I guess I ascribe to the everything is hypnosis.
Yeah.
Or maybe not so much that everything is hypnosis, but all the underlying principles that make it effective are in kind of every facet of living,
Mm-hmm.
Any social interaction and any interaction with yourself, really, like mindset is very important. So Definitely hooked. And I don't know, it's just interesting to see that evolution inside myself. I mean, I guess that's, who's having the experience, but to kind of see like where I was, even considering where I was when I first saw hypnosis, like in the NLP kind of books, to the point where I am now. I'm still kind of reshaping my preconceptions around what's possible and what it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that mimics the experience of anyone involved in hypnosis, regardless of how long. Because I've talked to Mike Mandel, for example.
Sure.
Which I think that's kind of where I found you, was through Elizabeth, through the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Association page. But he's a great example because he's been doing hypnosis for 50 years and he's continually still finding new and amazing stuff. And I haven't done it. I've done like half as long as he has, but there's always some new facet of the human experience that can pop up in anything, really, I think, that studies consciousness.
Yeah.
Interestingly, science is kind of catching up slowly but surely with, the hypnosis precursors, with the religious traditions that would get you into a trance and, crazy stuff would happen, or philosophical practices that would do the same thing, meditations and such. Yeah. I think hypnosis is kind of the new branch of that particular type of experience that's opening doors for people.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're always going to be finding new stuff as the discipline continues, I think.
Yeah. And the biggest part, and it reminds me of kind of the idea of like when you go to college and you're learning all of this, you're learning like all this, formal education. But when you get to the real world, like it's so completely different. So you've learned the principles, how it should work, but it's when you get that real experience that you start really, it's kind of a mix. You started, for me personally, I've started appreciating just like how expansive this can be, how simple a change can be, how you don't even have to overthink it. And, I guess from experiencing trance so much, I really recommend that I hope that most hypnotists have the chance to experience trance, either, self-hypnosis or with other people, being the client often, just because if you almost do that in a 1-to-1 ratio, like being the client and experiencing hypnosis and then working with a person, you will grow exponentially because you just start becoming so fluid. Like you let go of so many preconceptions and misconceptions you may have had. And then you start to really trust yourself to the point where it's all automatic. You barely have to give it much conscious thought and you're just kind of operating on autopilot, but it's in that like deep connection that you have with the client sitting across from you,
Yeah. It's really weird. And I think the majority of hypnotists have just, as time goes by, they'll have an encyclopedia of events where that deep rapport, there's something about forming rapport between your own conscious mind and your unconscious processes.
Yeah.
And then reaching out through hypnosis or through whatever version of it you use and creating that rapport bond with your client. Weird stuff just starts to come through sometimes, and you just have those insights into the client's behaviors, and it can be a little freaky sometimes, but sometimes you just look at somebody and you just suddenly realize exactly the right methodology to use on them, whether you're using parts integration or more of a guided visualization and metaphorical approach. It's a very strange portion of the human experience that is difficult to appreciate until you've gone through it a bunch of times. But
definitely.
Yeah, but it's pretty astounding. Yeah, I agree. It's 100% amazing when it happens.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I guess just that's kind of where I'm at now is going back to kind of integrative hypnosis. I was kind of like nerding out on all the neuroscience.
Oh, yeah.
Like Keeping the Brain in Mind by, like Sean Carson, Melissa Tiers. That book, I read it so many different times. And at this point, I'm kind of appreciating all of that neuroscience more as a metaphor, just because like you were mentioning, like when there is that connection, it's almost kind of like I'm at the point where I appreciate the experience so much that I don't care to explain it. If that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, you lose something in taking an experience that stems from the unconscious and narrowing it down by words. So
Yeah.
explaining it, you're only really, it's the whole iceberg metaphor. You're only able to explain and define that tiny little tip of it while the rest of it is still moving around doing its thing underwater.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so I'm hooked. Definitely hooked.
Yeah, I get it. It's hard not to be. It's an amazing discipline to learn. And I really hope that the industry seems to be swinging in a direction recently that I think is shaking free a lot of the untrained people who really basically need more training before they go into the business themselves. That's really coming out because we have so many really advanced people offering certification courses and training now that are legit educational processes.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the the 3-day seminar and then you get your certificate and you go hang out your shingle.
Right.
Yeah, and I think as time goes by, we'll get rid of more of the shysters as well, which is excellent. I think that's a problem in the industry, unfortunately. But
yeah, and that always has me curious. I just like I'm thinking of like a more naive me and that was kind of like my issue with hypnosis was I was kind of worried about that, like shysters and people that are manipulative, and kind of like wanting to hand over me, like all of me, to someone like that. And so I was always kind of like, I would shy away from it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I'm just so fascinated how you can even be a shyster, like, because it's coming back like to how you mentioned, like first having that deep rapport with your conscious mind and unconscious mind together,
Mm-hmm.
and then having that with your client across from you, really connecting with them on that level and having all the minds on board for this process. I guess I just don't understand what you would be getting as a shyster, because some part of me feels like you wouldn't be getting the change for them. Like what is the motivation? I guess are you talking outside of like a client-centered approach more?
Yeah, I've seen a number, I won't name drop because
Sure.
because it's 2019 and I don't want to get sued. But there have been a number of people here in California, one or two in Northern California, that have been, let's just say, questionable at best. I've seen a few hypnotists actually escorted physically off of a fairground that they tried to set up an illegal show on, thinking that they would talk their way through the ability to do. One of my favorite stories was a dentist who had this. I think this was actually back east. It was a dentist who would learn NLP and would use NLP and some basic hypnosis stuff to try for pain relief for their client while they're in the chair. So she's walking them through, the visualization, the feeling of numb and cold in their mouth, and then she threaded in, and you'll want to pay $500 over what I offer, and just kind of tried to gloss over that. And of course, their patient caught it. And the patient was like, "What?" Mouth like, "Well, we're done here." And just like, got up and left because they hadn't started the drill yet. But
that's so interesting.
Yeah, I was blown away when I heard about that one. But those people inevitably see themselves out because they're not in congruence with, the deep part of themselves that pushes humanity forward.
Right.
Yeah. Not being in congruence, that'll screw you up every time.
Yes. And I think that's such a huge point. Like you're saying that they're kind of on their way out the door, by and large, just because, and I guess that's what's really cool about having so much available nowadays, hypnosis gaining wider like spread, to where more people are more interested and like very curious, that there are so many quality practitioners that are doing the work on themselves, that just inevitably reflects in the work that they're doing, like they're getting those results more often, but then they're heart-centered, and it's just like, it's kind of like, it's someone you want to be with outside of the session. Like, I just want to be around this person because they like lift me up, like just feel good being around them. And there's a lot more practitioners that kind of exemplify and exude that, to where, it's like people are going to find them just from referrals, and because they're getting business and they can keep on reaching more people because they have the money to do that. I'm really excited personally, And yeah, I don't know. All in all, it's just an amazing profession.
Yeah, definitely. I really like what you said about doing the work on yourself first, because I think that I'm slowly trying to build into my own particular branch of hypnosis based on Carl Gustav Jung's work with the archetypal structure of the deep psyche. That's just kind of where I'm drawn. I'm also working on my grad school for psychotherapy as well.
Very cool.
But yeah, finding those deep mechanisms that draw, in my case, along archetypal means, I think, while it's a very rough experience, because there's no real hiding from that shadow material when you start knocking on its door, you come through it as a person who is much more congruent with those deeper mechanisms and able to come out and move forward and kind of you just find those opportunities start showing up almost synchronously.
Yes.
That's a new word I just made.
Synchronously. I don't really know the word.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll call Webster. Just have to put it in there. I hate being wrong. But yeah, those weird opportunities just pop up. For example, Lori Hammond and I were talking weight loss program. Because do you know Lori?
Yes, vaguely. I have been familiar with all the stuff she's been offering on Facebook currently.
Yeah.
All the like cheat sheets and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. She's really taken off, which is great. I remember meeting her when she was first starting and she left her previous career into it, and now she's just exploding. It's
very cool.
Good for you, Lori, if you're listening. But I was talking with her about weight loss programs and how best to put them together. And lo and behold, like my number of contacts for weight loss clients exploded by like 300%. Just
very interesting. Out
of nowhere, just because we had that particular conversation. Could be coincidence, but I'm starting to not believe in coincidence the more I investigate into this type of stuff. So.
Definitely.
Yeah. Have you found weird patterns in client contacts or in your own personal life when you start exploring things hypnotically?
Wow, that's really interesting you asked that. And there was, I was thinking about the shadow work. Yeah. So I would like to get back to that too in the future. I have, really when I first started out, there was a couple things that really fascinated me about hypnosis and that I really wanted to work with a client in, namely glove anesthesia. Yeah. Or because it was kind of like the benchmark I was setting for myself. Like if I am able to do this with a client, then I really know hypnosis. Like I really do this. And basically every time I kind of had one of those things in my mind, a client would come in with that issue, but I didn't really realize it until you asked me the question. Yeah. Because one of my first clients was she was having surgery, and she had a carpal tunnel in both her wrists.
Ooh.
So the year before, she had surgery on her right wrist, mm-hmm. and she took a month off work, and she still wasn't healed after a month. It took her 6 weeks. And all things considered, she was just very nervous and scared about this next one just because she's already been through it. Yeah, and kind of that whole having to go to work, 2 weeks early, like she's typing, that's where she got it from. So having to work, even though it's not completely healed, she was just having a lot of issues around all of it, the whole process. So she reached out to me through as a referral, right near the beginning, right after I got certified. And I was just kind of I don't know. At that point, I was still I wasn't at that point where I was oh no, because sometimes we can overthink it, So I was very much enthusiastic. I was oh my God, I can't imagine how this is going to go. So I did a session with her, and this is what I think is one of the biggest learnings that I've ever had. Honestly, there's so many different ways that you can run a session.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I do nowadays is kind of half conversational, half deep trance, formal trance work. At this point, I was just doing an induction, and it was just a 50-minute session of just trance.
Yeah.
So I worked with her, and it was half her language, but it was half kind of assumptive. It was, almost kind of scripted since I was so new. Mm-hmm. And despite all of that, I could never have anticipated the results she would get. So we did it the night before she had surgery, and then the next day she went in, and I think she reached out to me the day after she had surgery, and she was just kind of like really blown away. She opened the conversation. She's like, I knew things were different when my mom wasn't like making me a nervous wreck.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, cool. It generalized out, like, because her mom drove her to the doctor, or to the operating where she was having surgery. And the next thing was really crazy. Like, so she was in the chair and she had her eyes closed, and she wasn't really aware. She was just like really inside.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor had to give her like 4 shots, basically inserting the needle at the base of her palm, and the needle went through her palm to her knuckle.
Mm.
And he had to do 1 for each knuckle.
Oof.
Right. And so it was really interesting. When he was finishing up the 4th one, he's like, hey, do you see this? And he was like, getting her attention.
Mm-hmm.
And she opened her eyes, and he's like, do you see this? And she said she didn't feel any of the needles.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of blew me away, because the way that I learned field of anesthesia is that you're there right there. You're doing the process with them, and you're helping them to experience that in the present. But I wasn't there, So the suggestions that I gave her, she interpreted to kind of have half of her body go numb. So like when the doctor asked her, are you seeing this? He was pointing to her right side, and she's like, look at that side, and then look at this side. And so her right side was like gripping the arm of the chair and like shaking, and like it was like holding all the stress, so that this side, her left side, could be fully cooperative with the doctor, to not get in the way of anything that he's doing, and to kind of like, be fully, just optimally there to experience it. And the wildest part was, the left side was completely relaxed and numb. So that was like a really big turning point for me to appreciate how differently we all interpret suggestions. In my head, what I thought her results might be versus what she really got. But then even to realize how profound an experience that was for her was something that nowadays I might consider simple. Just going right into trance and having like a deep trance, without like the formal like conversational coaching ahead of time. So that's been hugely liberating on a lot of senses every time I kind of like come back to this, because it reminds me basically about the conscious mind and the unconscious, like what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The conscious mind just has a tendency to overcomplicate things, and sometimes it just has to be simple / unconscious, however you want to consider that,
Yeah. And it's really weird how so many different hypnotists have that different description of conscious versus, unconscious, non-conscious, subconscious, other than conscious. Everyone has their own model, even within, student groups from the same instructor. Like a bunch of us who are Mike students have different frameworks that we operate under, but we all get results. And I think that really speaks for the underlying mechanisms of the unconscious mind. And my personal thought, and I'm exploring this a bit more, is that your technique does not matter as much as your ability to make that connection, that rapport on the unconscious level. Because when you entrain 2 minds in that way, I have always found that the minds are willing to move towards what's best for them. So I remember running into Chris Thompson at last year's HypnoFonts, and we were just shooting the breeze, and we were talking about weight loss, because he's an extremely fit guy, and he recently did a lot of his own research on ketogenic diets and that sort of thing. And I remember him looking me dead in my eyes when I was saying, I just need to lose a few pounds, because I was very much into powerlifting at that point in time. So I was just eating everything I could so I could lift more weight. But I decided I wanted to drop a few pounds. I mentioned it to him, and he looks me dead in my eyes, and he just says, well, you just need to give up grains and sugars, unhealthy grains and sugars, rather. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then the next morning, I go down and I ordered a a plate of pancakes at the restaurant in the casino, and it showed up at the table, and I was just like, holy crap, I do not want any of this.
Huh.
And I was like, wait a minute, I love pancakes. And I looked at the sugar and I looked at the pancakes and I was like, oh, holy crap. I ordered these out of habit. And I looked at them and consciously I was like, yeah, I always get those. And I ordered those. But that deeper mechanism that Chris had, I talked to him later. He wasn't deliberate, but he was just very congruent in the way that he spoke. My unconscious was like, hey, no, yeah, you don't want that. So, I called the waitress over and I'm like, look, I'm really sorry. Can I get this changed over for some bacon and eggs? We did that. But that congruency, that rapport is just so powerful,
Yes. And that's such first, that's an awesome story.
Right.
And to have experienced that, and I think that's what's so powerful about experiencing these things is, again, like it kind of almost as the client. Because then it's just like, it really expands your mind. And then those two principles, right now I'm in the camp. Recently I've been really reconsidering a lot of stuff that's out there that people teach and talk about. And I know there's the whole idea, I just did a video on this about scripts.
Yeah.
And I was really, because a lot of it makes sense. Like when you hear everyone's kind of argument or position on it. Mm-hmm. But when I kind of like went deeper, it's almost kind of like, well, first off, I don't want to digress too much, but like what constitutes a script? Like are language patterns scripts? Is syntax a script?
Yeah.
Like if I say a bunch of words out of order and they don't make sense, it's unscripted, but it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So it's just because we're used to it and it's an unconscious process now, doesn't mean it was never scripted. Well, that was kind of one of my first thoughts. But aside from that, I'm really falling in the camp that if you are using a script and you're literally just reading it verbatim, mm-hmm. if you're reading it with that connection and that congruency, mm-hmm. I believe it kind of reminds me of EFT, but basically you can use any modality, and if that rapport and the congruency is there, you can help anyone change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really speaks towards the fluidity of the human experience, that we can make that connection and move in literally any direction, which is absolutely wonderful in the change work industry. If somebody wants to build self-esteem, lose some old bad habits, feel better in general, whatever they come to you for. But on that flip side, I mean, like everything in life, hypnosis does have its shadow side. And that's, the religious cults, the manipulative politicians, the pickup artists,
sure,
and that kind of stuff. And those, I think, they tend to fall more into people who are not integrating or in congruency with their unconscious, and they end up acting from, like we were talking about the shadow earlier, they're acting from their own shadow impulse and probably haven't done the inner work at that point, so they're not moving in the right direction. But do you have any interesting experiences and stuff with that, more shadowy side of things you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah, I really do. This is kind of an interesting question. So, man, it's been really interesting. And it's kind of a long story, but in a good way.
Okay.
For a long time, I had been hearing about like the inner child, mm-hmm. and I had been hearing about the shadow self, or like the shadow side. And I've always kind of, I guess first and foremost, I'm kind of like a skeptic and scientific, but I'm also very, like I'm a wannabe believer, right?
Yeah.
So I'll entertain like the wildest and craziest ideas, but I need that experience first, like so that way I can validate it. Be like, yes, I've had a personal experience. Now I can, congruently talk about this instead of it being kind of just like imagination. So for me, I never really kind of resonated with like the inner child. Like it just seemed kind of woo-woo at the time. Mm-hmm. Like maybe this was like 3 years ago. And the shadow self I was a little more interested in, but I didn't really understand it so much at that point.
Yeah.
When I first was getting to the point where I wanted to get certified, I decided to create a group where we would practice hypnosis together. Mm-hmm. So we'd just kind of like run scripts and get used to like a progressive relaxation.
Yeah.
And one of the first meetups I had like this huge thing that I wanted to deliver with all this like body language and nonverbal communication, like all this stuff. And it was way overwhelming, but I persisted nonetheless. And there was one point when I was getting close to like the day that I was supposed to present all of this, that I was like, man, what am I doing? Like, if I'm wanting to go to hypnosis, why am I not using hypnosis?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just kind of went in my room into like a kind of like a place where I meditate that kind of has that energy maybe, or like that context that lets my unconscious know what we're about to be doing.
Yeah.
So I was sitting there and I started kind of just building myself up, basically. I was like complimenting myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing that, it got to a point where I wasn't complimenting like me, aware me, but I was complimenting like before, like you were talking about all those synchronicities.
Yeah.
I started complimenting that mechanism inside of me that's put me in these situations, that's kind of tied all this together, that's done the heavy lifting, that's just kind of had me like step up to the plate, like, oh, okay, we're doing this now, right? And the more I was complimenting that aspect of me, all of a sudden I felt like this really solid energy, like thing inside of me, like from my chest down to like past my belly button just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And my body was like nodding, but it was a very like overreactive nod. Like it wasn't a conscious nodding, like a, like that. It was more of this kind of like half my body is like swinging over. Mm-hmm. It was at the moment when I was like, oh my God, it's the inner child. And that's when I started like really nodding, like that. And I was like, that just blew me away. Mainly because it wasn't like my metaphor, right? That didn't really resonate with me up until that point. So having this experience really kind of like got me very curious. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of started considering that experience, like, and it just kind of went on the back burner. And then really it was like a year after that, I took some acid. So yeah, this switched really quick. But what I found just in the past, I had experimented with psychedelics basically, to kind of really understand how they work, what you can get from them and all this stuff. And I realized like how important intention is. And I know that's very true in hypnosis. Yeah. It's kind of going back to that congruency, like having that congruent intention, wanting to connect and help the client, like really, I think adds to the energy there, that the process in itself. So in a sense, it's kind of similar in psychedelics. So I went into this just kind of with some questions that were burning in my mind. Mm-hmm. And I just got like the coolest imagery. And part of it was like this idea of the shadow self. It was like, or the rival. Yeah. I didn't really understand it. But it was like me. And then there was like another me with like black hair and brown eyes.
Did he have a goatee as well? Or
right? No. It looked like me, just different hair color and eye color. Mm-hmm. And it was this like it was such an interesting experience because as I was looking at that other me, it would just seamlessly blend to where I was looking at that other me again. So like it was basically like perceptual positions, like on automatic, right? And so that just kind of gave me. It's just interesting how having that metaphor and what clicked after that, like all of the kind of like information, the download that I got from that, got me really curious, because then I kind of realized that I guess was more of kind of like seeing the oneness in between all of us. Yeah. In that sense. And then it took me like a year to process that. So then maybe about a year or so later, I tripped again. And I was still just very curious because it was more, I got a lot of insight from that, and it helped me connect in ways and kind of like see past, like mainstream society, like how we think things are, and really appreciate that. But there's still kind of this idea, like I didn't really know if that was everything there was to get from that. So then I went in with that same intention about just basically like the shadow self and like this idea of the rival. Mm-hmm. So this time when I went in, it was just the wildest thing. It's hard to explain, I guess. I guess basically it was pure light, and then from that like a light kind of broke free, and it was traveling very, very, very fast in like a circle. And as it descended, it began slowing down, and it really kind of reminded me of like energy turning into matter.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point it started splitting, and then there was like 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then there was a lot. And then as it kind of got down to the material world, it was just this interesting, like, just interesting kind of imagery. There was basically there was like a kind of like a macho man with like his girlfriend, and they were in like a bar setting, and some guy like was walking by and like accidentally bumped the girlfriend. And in that moment, like, the macho man just like, he just got so mad, and like a fight started, but it paused right before the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I just got like rushed with like all this, like, just, I guess, information. It was just kind of the idea that the macho man, for him, he's so averse to being feminine that he's seeking that in his girlfriend. And so she is just a replacement for that feminine nature inside of him that he's not looking to cultivate, because he doesn't want any aspect of that in him. So this is when it started all kind of processing, and I was understanding that's kind of like his shadow self.
Yeah.
But it's to the point that he can't allow himself not to be like that hyper macho, so where he instantly starts a fight just because someone bumped his girlfriend.
Yeah.
But there was just like a lot more to that, just that like any conflict we have is just usually like a dance within ourselves.
Yeah.
And with another person. Like, it went like West Side Story, it was like there's like a tempo and stuff, and it was just interesting to consider, like, if you just change one element, how much the dance changes. But that was kind of what I was getting from that, is that was basically like that. Like, any conflict we have with any person outside, it's basically us not accepting that aspect of us inside of ourselves. And it just kind of really reminded me of projection. And then going past that, then it kind of like went back to like a spiritual aspect, to where it showed me how it was just really, trippy, of course, right?
Yeah.
But it was kind of like showing me like the path. And this whole time I thought like I was on this journey, like I was like going towards some destination. And as I'm going down this path that it showed me, on the other end was a mirror. And that just like blew me away, because in that moment, like, a lot of stuff clicked, that basically any journey that we think we're on is really a journey of like self-rectification, like coming to terms with who we are, like really getting to know and understand ourselves, but not just who we think we are right now. It's like all those things that we are repressing, that we don't want to admit that we are. And it was just such great imagery and all of it kind of coming together. It showed me kind of like a simple technique that I do teach people as far as like parts integration. It's like mini parts integration. So like anytime we have like a conflict, basically it's our unconscious trying, okay, this is kind of how it is. It's a part of us that wants attention. It wants to be acknowledged. It wants to be loved. It wants to be like fully integrated. So in those moments when we might be projecting or like going to blame somewhere and be like, oh, I can't believe this person is doing this, it's a chance that part is trying to be seen and be heard. And so in that moment, you can thank your unconscious, like, thank you for sharing that with me. Like, and then the second question is like, what do you want me to know? What should I know about this? And then after that, it's been my experience and like other people's experience that like you'll get that like insight, like something that you hadn't considered before consciously, right? You get this like new piece and you're like, oh, okay. And then it's just kind of like a thanking and loving and really bringing that into you. And it's just like it's like a really small, easy process, but slowly and surely you begin integrating all those parts. And it's almost like you mentioned with the pancakes, it's almost like a pattern interrupt. Like anytime that you're feeling that conflict, either with yourself or someone else, by replacing it with this, that's what you start getting in the habit of doing, is like fully integrating yourself and getting over conflict. And you know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds like, I mean, there is a lot to unpack in that.
Right.
Like any good trip. So I hear, speaking for a friend, there's so much in there, like the light and then the part coming down and then breaking into other things that immediately makes me think of the Taoist stories of the beginning of the universe. I mean, first there was the one which descended down and became the two, and then the three, and then the multitude of things. And then, of course, the male and the female integrating or not integrating. I mean, that sounds very animus, or the syzygy, syzygy to me. And that was really some good heavy stuff there to just drop on everyone. I dig it.
Definitely.
That many parts integration, I really like that, because that sounds a lot like some basic, good old-fashioned shadow work there of having to accept the things, parts of yourself that you've never looked at, that just when you look at somebody else that personifies it, just, you don't know why, but it just ticks you off. But you end up having to kind of integrate that and understand it. Like, my personal analog to that was, been a martial artist for 35 years now.
Nice.
And I've multiple black belts in one particular art, and I studied a lot of the European stuff as well. But I had never been truly comfortable with being a dangerous person. And I don't say that in a way that is bragatory or gregarious or anything like that.
Sure.
And yes, I'm trying to think of fancy words to say that, but fancy ways to say blowhard. That'll be the subtext for the episode today. But previously, I haven't been in a whole lot of fights in my life, but there have been a few times where friends have gotten into scraps and I've had to help out, and that happens. But I've always felt overwhelmingly guilty afterwards. And it wasn't really until I think it was actually late last year, at 41 that year, when I actually was able to sit down and recognize that as I'm progressing farther into my training, and I'll be moving more towards a Shidoshi role in the next year or two, that was a part of me that I had been honing and practicing for decades, but had never truly accepted. And it wasn't until, like, I sat down and sat with it and was like, holy crap, A, I'm 6'4" and 240. I'm a big dude. But B, I refined that potential even farther into that, and I never really integrated that archetypal warrior energy correctly. And once I sat down and dealt with that, I was like, oh, hey, nice. It was just like, that wonderful deep breath when you're like, okay, that just clicks. And, I don't have to look at it as, this is Nick here, and then this is Nick when the martial arts class starts, and this is Nick if, the crap hits the fan. It's that one thing that binds together. And that's my mini parts therapy.
And that's such an interesting perspective, kind of, because that's what we're almost trained to do, is to compartmentalize ourselves, career us, and then like at home us and family us. And it's interesting. I don't know. Parts integration just really, that's another piece within hypnosis that I just really love, because it feels so like basically like what you're mentioning, it feels so liberating and expansive to kind of just be you, to not like, unashamedly, like just be all of you, and like to have all of that available at any moment instead of having to, because it's interesting, like you still can kind of like compartmentalize yourself, as in like you're not turning on the switch, but it's not like you're boxing it, you're not like quarantining it and keeping it separate. It's like there, it just doesn't have to be like on completely, like just kind of the idea of like, they say, and this is kind of a thing in hypnosis, like people, when they say that they want more energy, you ask them, well, like, when do you want more energy? Like, do you want more energy before you're going to bed? Like, like it's about setting that context. And so it's cool to have all of your power totally available at any moment, but then also knowing how much of that you need in each context, and being very intentional again. It comes back to intention.
Yeah, definitely. There's a metaphor I like to use with some clients who have a tendency to, I had one client, he was not like a CEO, but he was high up in a corporate ranking for a local business, or an extension of a local business, either or. And he had spent so much time being under so much stress, he had just ratcheted his reactivity way up, unintentionally, of course. But he just could not go through the normal progressive relaxation kind of stuff. Because like with any anxiety person, that's kind of where you want to start, and notice your breathing, focus on relaxation, knock all the body sensations out of the way, and then move into the unconscious.
Yeah.
But this guy just would not calm down. Wonderful guy. I'm not criticizing him in any ways, but I found a good metaphor that fits perfectly with what you just said, and that was comparing him to a cat, like a house cat. Because you know how a house cat can be, just like on the one hand, just super alert, crazy hyper, running from one room to another, tricking you into petting it, and then just clawing the crap out of your hand.
Yeah.
But then 2 seconds later, they're lying on the ground, rolling their head upside down, looking at you like the most adorable creature ever to walk the face of the planet that you just want to, hug, and is contorting itself into these bizarre shapes that require this amazing flexibility. And as it turns out, fortunately, it was, I guess, part of the rapport that was through. He happened to be a cat owner.
Oh, yeah.
So he had all this nice, vivid imagery that he could do, and the guy just plopped right down and relaxed at that point, and we were able to move forward with that metaphor. But
very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird that as far as the parts therapy stuff goes, we have those little things inside us that the right hands can just pull right out and help you work with at that point.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the shadow work stuff, though, because
sure,
it's seriously interesting. Now, one thing that I tend to wander into as far as archetypal stuff goes, which doesn't sync quite with a number of other people's view of things, which used to aggravate me, but as in all things with human experience, people have their own views and frameworks that work.
Sure.
Do you find it more useful to treat any shadow work as the shadow as a separate entity or an archetype itself? Or do you look at it more as a dysfunction of something that's going on, something that you're not properly integrating or paying attention to? Curiosity.
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. At this point, I would say it's kind of neither. In the sense, I don't see it, especially kind of the framework of hypnosis, I don't see anything as a problem. There might be things that we're experiencing that we don't want to be, but like I don't look at it like this is a problem that needs to be fixed, because I guess that's the connotation on the word problem, is that like it implies it has to be fixed.
Yeah.
And I don't, right. So I don't think it's like really that we're fixing it. And then and then treating it as a separate entity, at that point I feel like then it would still kind of be quarantined.
Yeah.
It would still be like separate of me, or I'd at least be trying to keep it like arm's distance, or kind of like, where I can observe it from a safe distance.
Yeah.
So at this point, I just, that's a really good question. And I guess it's, like intuitively, I just think of it as the unconscious. I just think of it as like who I am personally. It's my unconscious. I don't understand it completely yet. And personally, like my mission is to understand all of my unconscious, because it kind of goes back to that inner child moment. Like it's had my back for so long. It's put me in those situations. It's always, it's wiser than I am. Like even when I'm like, can get on my high horse and be like, oh, I'm so smart. Like it kind of like takes me back to that moment when I was like, man, but where did that come from?
Yeah.
Like where did I get that insight or that intuition? Or, I'm not trying to discredit my effort, right? All the work that I've put in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I kind of see the shadow as a misunderstood portion of my unconscious.
I like that. I definitely like that, because it draws that nice illustration between your unconscious processes and then how your conscious mind has to approach those processes. And instead of simply saying only the unconscious communicates to the conscious mind, which is kind of how a lot of things go. A lot of people never really flip it and look at, how do I consciously understand this communication that's coming through? And that we're forced into this weird position between conscious and unconscious. I'm doing this like crazy, like hand catalepsy arm thing while I'm doing this. I'll have to figure out why later. But that weird point of view that we're forced into having to do by the nature of our own minds, I think, almost contributes to isolation of the unconscious from the conscious mind. I mean, just to talk about it, we have to talk about the unconscious as something almost separate from our minds.
Yeah.
Which is, it's very weird.
It is.
It works, but the question is always, does it work as well as it could?
Right.
Yeah, which is unusual. Greater minds than mine may need to delve into that as time goes by and find neat stuff. But
that reminds me, recently, and I didn't even realize what I was doing was conscious-unconscious dissociation.
mm-hmm.
I picked up this idea from a friend who runs a class, and it's like really quality information. It's kind of it has a spiritual lens, maybe not so new agey, but it deals with like reincarnation and karma and stuff.
Okay.
One part of the class is everyone gets to, you establish a communication with your unconscious. Really, yeah, the first class basically in a nutshell is creating trust between you and your unconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the earlier classes, she guides everyone through like a guided meditation to where they ask their unconscious, what's its name? And I always thought it was so cool. First to get a response and be like, whoa, okay, you know? And then that's kind of how you start creating that trust, by like addressing it by its name. And then like every week you'll check in and be like, what's something that you want to do this week?
Mm-hmm.
And then then you basically would like to, you know, promise it that we're going to get to this and make time for it. So it's kind of like almost like, you know, having a relationship with another person, but inside yourself, right? And so that's always been, since then I've been really fascinated in this idea. And I noticed, yeah, like in hypnosis, it's really inevitable that we talk about it as like a distinct, I was talking about this with someone the other day, almost like it's like a coma state entity, right?
Like a what?
Like a coma state entity. Like it's just lying there. You know what I mean? It's just like there, we're talking about it like, oh yeah, you know, the unconscious, you know, but we don't address it like as if it's like present with us every moment,
mm-hmm.
you know, like, and so I found it just really powerful to kind of see it in this lens, to see it as like a dynamic creative force that I can't unconsciously understand completely, that I'm striving to, but to have that relationship with it. And then I guess that's really helped in the shadow work, because now it's just kind of like a relationship and stuff. It kind of fell apart there, but that's what it kind of reminded me of, is that we do kind of compartmentalize each. And like doing the reverse would really be beneficial. And that was the thing. I didn't realize. I've been trying that with clients,
mm-hmm.
like asking them to ask their unconscious what their name is.
Yeah.
And then when they're in like a deep trance, then I'll talk to the unconscious. Like I'll use that name mm-hmm. instead of talking to them. And that's been really fun to play with.
Okay. So instead of the traditional, like, and now I'd like to think you're unconscious, you're like, and now I'd like to think Steve,
right.
Whatever name is applied to it. Okay.
Right. And then I would just communicate like that directly with it. Like, and Steve, just taking a moment to process that now, you know, or process that fully, or, you know, begin to start showing those resources that can really benefit the other person. Mm-hmm. So it's been interesting, definitely. And I've gotten really good results with it. Like even conversationally, I did that with a client and I was just kind of blown away because, you know, I like to go in increments. So I started with like doing this in a deep trance, but then I was trying it with a client that was very responsive in like a light conversational trance. Mm-hmm. And when I did that helped them so tremendously. Like it like the problem was gone in like 5 minutes. I was like, what, you know, like, excellent. Yeah, it was so cool. So it was just something that I wanted to share. And I would like to see the field kind of like mm-hmm. Talking about it in this way, that it's like a dynamic creative entity instead of like mm-hmm. coma state entity.
Yeah, instead of just a bunch of processes that you can poke around with.
Right.
Yeah. That is something that drives me a little bit up the wall. I understand the need for, of course, being always careful and discreet with our clients. And, you know, we can only ethically and legally do so much as far as exploring consciousness goes with hypnosis. But at that same point in time, I do think that integrating hypnosis into the various types of hypnosis, I should say, into the fields of psychology and maybe psychiatry as well for the brain stuff, we would have a lot of benefit there, more than we've seen so far anyway, with the two disciplines kind of being separate, if that makes sense. This is kind of where I sit, being both a student of psychology and a hypnotist at the same point in time. It's like having your feet in two different pools.
Yeah.
But yeah, the dichotomy between those feels like such a false thing. And I like what you're saying about applying a name to the unconscious. It almost reminds me of a number of times where I've done some reading. I get clients oftentimes who are involved in the occult now and then.
Sure.
The occult, very broad term. I mean, I don't deal with super crazy people. Thankfully, I refer out to a psychologist I know. But people have often come to me and they talk about esoterica, like the Western concept of the holy guardian angel or the higher self, or something like that. And they'll often have these vaguely angelic, Abrahamic tradition angelic names attached to them. Or if somebody's really suffering, they'll have one of the names from the other side involved. And that's really interesting, because that was usually my experience, was these people have done exactly what you're describing. They put a name and a metaphor to their own inner experience, and they're not properly integrating them. The people who are feeling that they're interacting with their higher selves are very often doing exactly that. They just don't understand that 9 times out of 10 they're just communicating with themselves, essentially, a part that they were tapped into before. And then you get the odd case. I'm not going to go super in depth with it. You get the odd case where stuff just doesn't line up, and they're either messing with you or you're messing with some next level stuff, and you need to back off.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I'll tell you about that some other time.
Definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really interesting. I'm glad to see more people are looking at shadow work and proper integration and stuff like that in the field.
Definitely. Yeah, and that's a really good point too about like the fact that they are already doing that, and I think that's, I don't know, that's why I'm kind of excited about the future, and just to keep on like moving it forward with like my career, like basically to begin creating the things that I want to create, because I've been really focused on just the business side of it, and not so much like the creation portion. But I'd like to kind of distill this framework and give it to people, and they can try it out and see how it feels, and if not, cool. Absolutely. And I feel like that is kind of a thing with religion, is that, and like you were mentioning before about cults. Yeah. I feel like that's like an old, outdated mechanism to be able to kind of take away our power and keep us in line by using that terminology, because then you feel like it's something outside of yourself. And then you feel that if you do the wrong thing, they may even imply that if you do the wrong thing, like you're going to lose that connection, you're going to lose that power. Yeah. And so it's like not realizing that, right, it is an aspect of us. And this came up recently too about the unconscious mind again too, because you mentioned like the Holy Guardian Angel. It reminded me of how I felt personally, like my unconscious is kind of like a father and a child at the same time, you know, kind of going like religion wise, like it's like this very paternal figure that's like trying to take care of me. And, again, with the synchronicity, putting me into those places, making sure that I'm taken care of and that I can survive. Yeah. But it also has that very like childlike, innocent nature to it. That like that kind of humor even too, like it's like it's sharing an inside joke with you that like no one else understands kind of feeling. That's just been my experience. So having all these experiences, right, it adds up to this kind of totality where I see it completely different than I did 6 years ago. Like, when it was more like unconscious processes and like, like almost, like there's no intelligence there. Just cells somehow, beating your heart and doing all these, miraculous operations, but just cells.
Yeah. And on that basic, like cellular level, I mean, I get why so many hardcore scientists are very much like, nope, you are just a bunch of cells in a universe that doesn't care. everything is Newtonian physics except for some quantum stuff. That's it. Have a nice life. And you're like, well, you just knocked the underpinnings out of applying meaning to anything in your life. But I get like that's the direct observance of stuff. But yeah, I definitely think one of the advantages of working with hypnosis is, or any consciousness expanding practice. Why cut those guys out, right?
Very, very true.
Yeah, is you get to explore what those functions have meaning for. And you can find that you can play with that a bit and you can, put meaning to your life, I guess. I'm kind of wandering down a philosophical rabbit hole at that I think I'm going to pull out of very quickly.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely some interesting stuff to come as we explore that a bit more. And looks like we've got our hour going on here, so I'm going to go ahead and let you get on with your day.
Okay, very cool.
You want to tell anyone out there where we can reach you or reach out to you, see some of your handiwork, stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. Right now, all my stuff is basically on my website. It's francisrunzel.com.
Okay. And you're with Integrative Hypnosis Chicago. I'll put all that in the show notes on the bottom.
Very cool.
Make sure people got a way to reach you. They have any questions.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, man. I really appreciate you jumping in last minute here and taking up the slot for an interview. And I'm going to let you go. Say have a great day. All right, man?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
And having me on.
Really enjoyed it. I'll definitely keep you on my list of people to reach out and bug in the future.
Very cool.
All right. So, take care.
All right. You too.
Bye.
All right. Technical issues discounted. This was definitely a fantastic interview. I always enjoy speaking with Francis and look forward to some interviews with him sometime in the future. If you do want to follow up with Francis on anything from today's interview, you can be reached at francisrunzel.com. That's FrancisRunzel.com. You can also find him at Integrative Hypnosis Chicago on the internet. Feel free to reach out to him with any questions you have. Beyond that, I'm Nick, and I'm saying we'll see you next time. Thanks for spending your time with us.